Deus, o salutaris nostre, Domine ex Deus, Deus, Deus noster, Domine ex Deus, Angeli, Ave Pater, Laudem Domino Majestatis,
How's everybody doing? Up and having a fantastic day. It is Wednesday, July 16th, and we are doing our next installment of updates on His Holiness Pope Leo the 14th, getting back to some of our normal content. So if you've never seen this before, what this series is, they're all independent, so you don't need to go and watch the other ones, watch the previous ones if you want to understand what's going on here. I try to give all the information in a way that's interconnecting, so they flow together, but they're independent from one another. So you can just watch this video if you want to know about what Pope Leo has been talking about for the last 2-ish weeks. I'll give you all of the context, all of the theology that surrounds those statements that he makes so you can understand him. So when we get into all of these misunderstandings and scandals that often happen about a certain thing that a pope may say, you already know because you've already been watching exactly what the Pope has been saying, so you know how to interpret all these things. So we don't get a lot of the unfortunate confusion that happened under the Francis pontificate of people misunderstanding Pope Francis because they just didn't know the type of things he talked about. They didn't know the type of language he used. But you guys, on the other hand, you guys are informed Catholics who are attached to His Holiness, who are attached to the Holy See. And you always want to know what's going on, right? You guys always want to know what His Holiness is telling you guys to do because he has very specific directives depending on what is a lot of this stuff is, time-sensitive material. There's specific things going on in the world, and we need the voice of the Holy See telling us what we should be doing, the type of things we should be thinking about, the type of doctrines that are in play, the type of moral premises that are in play. These are the type of things we need to know about. So we always need to be focusing on the type of things that the Pope is telling us about, right? So that's what this series helps you do. You're able to watch me focus on all those things that that His Holiness Leo the 14th finds to be important. But before we get into that, we have a very good episode tonight. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things. The Pope's on vacation. He's writing his encyclical. He said some awesome things about law and order. He talked about how all of the reprobates who hate the environment need to be converted. Both those inside and outside the church, he said, they need conversion. They need to turn from their reprobate ways of hating the environment. So he said a lot of cool things, and we're going to be going over the cool stuff. Maybe we're going to be going over the stuff that you find slightly less interesting, but even if you don't find it interesting, remember it's important. So we're still going to talk about it, okay? But before we do all of that, I have a very important, very interesting announcement that you guys all need to know about. So I am hiring somebody to edit shorts for me, edit reels, that sort of thing. So if you are a person who has those type of skills, I will pay well, okay? So there's an application below. I just need you to fill out basic information, just your name and not your real name. You could just use your fake internet name and all of that sort of stuff. And then also an example, draw an example from maybe a recent video of the type of short that you would make for me. And it doesn't really take that much work. I don't demand insane sort of editing skills, just sort of basic stuff. So if that interests you, check out the link below. This will be open for the next probably like 2-ish weeks. I'll be keeping and waiting and seeing who I think is going to be the best for the job. But I want to expand a little bit into some other realms. So that would be very helpful. So definitely check that out. So now let's actually get into the video itself, because I mentioned before that he's going on vacation. So there's this installment is going to be slightly shorter because he's on vacation, which means that he's doing less stuff. He's still making certain speeches that are necessary, obviously, like homilies when he's at Mass, Angelus messages, things like this. He's going to still be giving all of those messages. But while he's on vacation, he doesn't have as many addresses and audiences and things like that. So this is going to be slightly shorter. And he's actually breaking a bit from a practice that Pope Francis engaged in, because there's a traditional papal vacation spot. Pope Francis kind of nixed the tradition. So this has been around, 12, 13 years since there's been this tradition practice of going to this particular place and the Pope having a vacation there during this particular time. Pope Francis said he didn't like that. He decided to kind of change the way in which it went. And Leo is going back. And this is a pattern that we've seen so far. We've seen this not only with traditions that Pope Francis stopped, but even traditions that have been ceased, going all the way back to like the pontificate of St. Paul VI, for example. So he's reversing traditions that go back pretty far, not only the ones that, reversing and going back to traditions, rather. Not only ones that were somehow reversed by Pope Francis, and this is one of them, the way in which he does vacation. So there was a report from the prior general of the Augustinian order. For those who don't know, Pope Leo, before he was Pope, he was a very important figure within the Augustinian order. He was the prior, or basically the head of the whole order. He's basically like the bishop of the order. He's the head guy of the entire Augustinian order. So he played a lot of very important roles there and knew a lot of the people in the Augustinian order. So somebody interviewed the current prior of the Augustinian order and asked him about what Leo's plans are, because this guy's very close to Leo and knows what's going on. So he gave a brief interview talking about the type of things that Leo is planning on doing, including two things that a lot of people have been asking about. The second one probably more so, but the first one is the one I care about more, okay? So the first very important thing is he's writing his encyclical. We don't know yet what the encyclical is going to be on. There's a lot of guesses. Some are saying, it's going to be on something about AI or something about social ethics. I think personally, from all of what I've read from Pope Leo, really his big focus is on encouraging missions. So missions, broadly speaking, is everything from, evangelization. That's usually what we think about missions. But according to Pope Leo's notion, the notion of the Catholic Church, missions can be used in a much broader sense to include any form of Catholic action, right? So any form of what Vatican II describes as like the lay apostolate, right? So when it comes to the lay apostolate, this is everything from, taking care of the elderly to feeding homeless people to political action to, actually evangelizing and preaching the gospel in a way that we would think about when it comes to traditional missionary work. So it seems like for me, that's the sort of thing that Pope Leo has been focusing on in many, many addresses, audiences, speeches, etc. He's been focusing on mission, Catholic action, the foundations for Catholic action, the particular areas of society that need the most effects of Catholic action, all of these different things. We're actually going to see some of these in some of the audiences that we're going to be going over today. So if I had to guess, that's what it's going to be on. There's been a market focus on AI, so maybe that's going to be something that could be a contender. But really, we don't know. We don't know at all. Okay. And then the second thing, the thing that a lot more people are interested on, is not only is he going to be considering his encyclical letter that he has to write, his first encyclical, which happens within the first few months to year of the new pontificate, but he also wants to decide curial appointments. So for those who don't know, the Pope has a lot of different cardinals and other clerics around him who run the curia of the church. The curia of the church, they are in charge of various different, kind of think about them like departments of the church. Think about it like the president's cabinet, right? So the curia has a degree of continuity between popes. It's not like the U.S. system where president, leaves and you go and you have to appoint all new people. The people continue after. So all of the people who were in the curia under Francis are still in the curia right now. He had this statement where he said, I'm going to just keep you all of you guys in your positions. Let's move forward from here, right? But eventually the Pope, ordinarily, the Pope is going to make his own appointments. So what he's going to do by this is he's going to fire some people. That's a weird way of talking about it, but basically, I mean, practically speaking, he's going to fire some people and hire new people. So when it comes to the person in charge of the DDF, for example, the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, that's a very important position. That's in charge of a lot of the theological aspects of the church. He's probably going to appoint somebody new to that. He's going to appoint somebody new to all of these different positions, and it's really going to be here. A lot of people, they've been talking about like Episcopal appointments. Sure, they're important, and some of his Episcopal, well, actually, I would say almost all of his Episcopal appointments were, positive. There weren't really anything bad about his Episcopal appointments in particular. But a lot of people were looking at Episcopal appointments and other things like this and who he was meeting in audiences and, rumors. But really the only two things that are going to matter for being able to discern in a very solid way what kind of pontificate it's going to be is going to be his teaching, which is what we've been really going over, and then his curial appointments. Because the curial appointments, these are really going to be the shakers and movers. These are going to be the people who are recommending bishop choices to the Pope. These are going to be the people who are going to be involved with the church's relationship to other countries. These are going to be the people who are going to be giving doctrinal judgments. These are going to be the people enforcing liturgical discipline. The people in the curia are the people who are basically the heart of the church. So once the curial appointments come through, and maybe, I'll find somebody who cares and knows a lot about this stuff, and maybe we could go over all of those. But once his curial appointments show through, this is going to tell us a lot about how the next 10, 15, however long he's in St. Peter's chair, how this Leo IX papacy is going to go on the practical level. Because on the doctrinal level, we've seen a lot of what he's been saying. It's very orthodox. It's extremely clear. I would say it's definitely, I absolutely love almost everything that he says. So on the doctrinal level, like I have no doubt that his encyclicals are going to be completely orthodox. They're going to be awesome. They're going to teach us a lot. They're going to add to a lot of the reflections of the church on certain topics in a very important, constructive way. They're going to reiterate a lot of the orthodox teachings that are being questioned by a lot of people. Like doctrinally, I think it's pretty solidly established so far that Pope Leo is going to be a very, very good Pope, right? But really, doctrine, as good as it is, of course, we love doctrine. There are those practical aspects of a Pope's rule which can be even more disastrous than maybe being unclear about this or that thing, or focusing on things that you don't need to focus on and not focusing on things that you need to focus on in your doctrinal teaching. Because all of these curial appointments, they can make or break a papacy, right? And this was a lot of the problems actually that were under Venerable Pius XII, although and I don't really want to go into the history behind that. But really, I'm emphasizing right now how serious, how important it is for you to pray for His Holiness, because the decisions that he makes in the next few weeks are going to be some of the most important decisions that he makes throughout his entire pontificate. These are going to be very vital, okay? So I wanted to actually get into some of the comments from the current prior of the Augustinian order, the comments that he's making about some of the character of Pope Leo, what he thinks Pope Leo is going to be covering, et cetera, et cetera. So his period of rest, according to Vatican News, it's going to be from the 6th, so July 6th to July 20th. So he's going to be going until the end of this week. And then he's going to have another rest for a few days in August. So there's kind of like a twofold papal rest. There's 2 weeks in July, and there's a few days in August. So this is what the report about the prior general of the Augustinian order says, quote, Father Moral, prior general of the Augustinian order, shared insights with the Italian Daily on how Pope Leo will spend his summer break in Castel Gandolfo. Quote, when he informed me that he would take a break by going to Castel Gandolfo, I was personally very happy. I know he is working a lot with astonishing rhythms. He is an indefatigable person, and I know that by nature, he never backs down. But lately, I've even seen him a bit thinner. He said that even in his time as prior general in the Augustinian Curia, Father Robert Francis Prevost always operated tirelessly. I remember that even when he was prior, he was the first to cross the chapel threshold early in the morning, and at night in his room, the light stayed on until very late. I remember because we were neighbors. Now that he is Pope, things have not changed much, and he has many more responsibilities. Father Morale told the journal that the Pope stays up late, replying to many messages on WhatsApp, even at 3 a.m, evidently when he reaches the end of his day before going to bed. It's his nature, reliable, consistent, prepared, never inattentive. Yeah, I found this part to be funny. I just, there was literally no reason for me to include this. This didn't really add much to the video, but I found it kind of funny, the idea that the Pope used to be up until like 3 o'clock in the morning on WhatsApp, answering messages. The Pope is literally Hassan. The Pope is literally Hassan, up all night answering messages on WhatsApp and then waking up like 2 hours later so he can go to mass. Yeah, Pope Leo is awesome. Okay, so continuing. While the fellow Augustinian admitted his public commitments have been reduced to a minimum for vacation, and that he will recite the Angelus and celebrate Sunday Mass in nearby parishes, he also said that at the Villa Barberini, where the Pope will be staying, I know he will begin work on his first encyclical. Asked whether the title is known yet, the prior replied, I don't think so. The other day, he just told me that he will use these 2 weeks to develop the main structure of the text. So there's actually something important that I wanted to highlight right here that a lot of people are missing. So when it comes to his writing of the encyclical, he is the one writing the encyclical. That's very important. This was something that Benedict did a lot more. Francis, not so much, and definitely not John Paul II. John Paul II, he was known for not really doing this as much, from at least my research, from what I've seen. This is something very unique that Pope Leo XIV is these encyclicals that he will be writing, not by ghostwriters. He's not going to be given a lot of the sort of prepackaged, Curial type documents. But Leo XIV is going to be personally writing a lot of this. This is going to be under his pen. So this is very, very interesting. And this actually tells us a lot about Pope Leo. So continuing, obviously, he is already working on it, but he is forced to do it in the evening or in spare moments. It would need more time, which will happen during the vacation. Regarding the encyclical, Father Morale said, I can imagine it will be something related to the concepts evoked since the first hours of his election. The theme of peace, social doctrine. This is what I think it's going to be on social doctrine. Peace, social doctrine, unity, artificial intelligence. But these are just my deductions. Only after the summer break, the Pope will make changes to the Vatican government. So, okay, we're changing the Curia as well. In other words, the Curia, Father Morale predicted. This break will certainly help him weigh everything. The time available will then be used to write the encyclical, end quote. So that's the entire report right there. Just kind of reiterating a lot of what I said earlier. But let's actually get into the individual audiences, addresses, speeches, etc. So we're starting with July 5th. We left off last time with the 4th of July. But on July 5th, he had an audience with teachers of Catholic schools in Ireland, England, Wales, and Scotland. And in this audience, there were a few interesting things that he said about pilgrimage and the theology of pilgrimage. But something that I really wanted to hone in on is he actually talks about silence again. So this is one of the strong critiques that Pope Leo has of the modern world, and one of the critiques that he has where he particularly says that this type of behavior is what is hurting a lot of people spiritually. He says that in the modern world, we often have so much noise, and this is something that a lot of us on the internet, constantly listening to YouTube videos, music, et cetera, a lot of the noise that we constantly flood into our ears, we're constantly distracted by things. You sit there, it's not just like audio sort of noise, but you sit there, you're kind of bored, you just open up your phone, you go on Twitter and you scroll, right? Or you go on Instagram, or you go on whatever else. And one of his critiques is actually, this is one of the most damaging behaviors when it comes to spirituality. So one of the advantages of pilgrimage is it's able to cut off completely those aspects. So this is what he says. He says, quote, a pilgrimage has a vital part to play in our life of faith, for it removes us from our homes and our daily routines and gives us time and space to encounter God more deeply. Such moments always help us to grow, for through them, the Holy Spirit gently fashions us to be ever more closely conformed to the mind and heart of Jesus Christ. In a particular way, dear brothers and sisters, young people gathered with us this morning, remember that God has created each one of you with a purpose and a mission in this life. Use this opportunity for listening, for prayer, so that you may hear more clearly God's voice calling you deep within your hearts. I would add that today, so often, we lose the ability to listen, to really listen. We listen to music. We have our ears flooded constantly with all kinds of digital input. But sometimes we forget to listen to our own hearts and it's in our hearts that God speaks to us, that God calls us and invites us to know him better and to live in his love. And through the listening, you might be open to allowing God's grace to strengthen your faith in Jesus so that you might more readily share the gift with others, end quote. And even here, what you have in this short statement, you see that Pope Leo, he is like addicted to mission. Like he can't help himself. You have here, he turns explicitly to young people and he's like, okay, you have to listen so you know what God wants you to do, you know? And he's saying, okay, well, the reason you're listening, you're going to be accepting this gift of grace, obviously, but you're doing it so you can actually share it with other people. So this is something which is vital for Pope Leo's sort of consciousness of things, which is why it's so important to, as I said in the intro to this stream, it's so important to keep a very close track of what Pope Leo is saying. Because we'll see he's making comments on everything. He's making comments on government and politics. He's making comments on, you know, how we care for the elderly. He's making comments on basically every single aspect of life. And this is what's so important about Catholic social doctrine. This is something that no other Christian denomination has. Catholicism has a very well-established Catholic social doctrine that touches every single aspect of life because we understand the universal call of the gospel to not only redeem individuals, but redeem individuals in all of the aspects of their life, in family, business, politics, government, you know, all of these other aspects. So the church has something to say about everything. The church has something to say about sports. The church has something to say about military, police. The church has something that, like, he mentions all of these random things, but really these are important things for us to know about because we want to know, how does the gospel place demands on us in relation to the elderly, for example? Like, that's a question that a lot of people probably wouldn't be able to ask. But Pope Leo answers the question by having an address on this. Pope Francis answered the question by having a catechetical series on this. These are important things that we need to think about when we're understanding what the gospel demands from each and every one of us, because each one of us is responsible in our own ways in accordance with our own abilities for the lay apostolate. You don't have to sit there and wait for a bishop to tell you what to do or a bishop to give you, you know, some sort of task. You don't have to sit there and join somebody else's thing. You know, you could just do things. Like, you can just go and do things. If you feel particularly called by a certain personal charism that you have, you know, you feel particularly called to fulfill the mission that you have to other people, the mission that you have to society, you know, to carry the effects of the redemption to other people. Like, you just go do it. Like, there's nobody stopping you from doing this, right? So now he continues. There's another audience that he had with the Augustinian sisters, and he spoke briefly about their charism, but there's a few important things that I wanted to highlight, again, on mission. It says, quote, "By imitating Sister Maria Teresa, you will therefore be patient in tribulations, because it is precisely in our trials that the Lord confirms his faithfulness. You will be courageous in the mission, so that the educational work to which you dedicate yourselves may form wise minds and hearts capable of listening and of passion for humanity. You will be unwavering in the following of Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and therefore the criterion for all our cultural initiatives. We know that a culture without truth becomes an instrument of the powerful. Instead of freeing consciences, it confuses and distracts them according to the interests of the market, fashion, or worldly success. In this regard, I advise you to pick up again the work by the holy doctor, our father, Augustine, De Magistro, to contemplate it in the near future, as you gather the fruits of your chapter. In this work, Augustine affirms that external teaching must always lead to the encounter with the inner master, who is Jesus. In his name, I wish all the best for your communities, and I wholeheartedly impart the apostolic blessing to you. Thank you." So it's important here. He's making this cultural critique. That's I guess what I wanted to highlight with this quote. The cultural critique, which is, it's kind of obvious. I posted this quote on Twitter where he says, "We know that a culture without truth becomes an instrument of the powerful. Instead of freeing consciences, it confuses and distracts them according to the interests of the market, fashion, or worldly success." What I wanted to highlight here, a lot of people were like, okay, this is obviously in reference to perhaps Western culture at large, or particularly to American culture, which, yeah, it's kind of obvious that's what he's critiquing here. But it is very important for us to consider what those aspects are to American culture in particular that need to be redeemed, because there's a lot of very good aspects to American culture. We all know about them. We can all think about them. But there's also a danger that the intense, and this is probably the most important aspect that gets praised by the popes, the intense energy in which Americans are able to fulfill a certain mandate, the sort of unconquerable energy in which they go after things. Pope Pius XII has a statement somewhat to that effect. But it's very easy for that unconquerable spirit and that relentless energy to be ordered towards a false end, to be ordered towards the ends of the market, to the ends of material success for our people. This is the era of economic liberalism, fashion, or worldly success in general. So he's just telling us that what we need to do is we need to take the unconquerable energy that we have, and we need to order it towards the end of the truth, which is obviously, ordering a culture towards the end of the gospel itself. So it's a profoundly integralist statement. But anyways, let's move forward to July 6th. And here he has an Angelus where he just has awesome quotes, absolutely awesome quotes. I would recommend you read the whole thing. But this is what he says, quote, "On the one hand, God, like a sower, has generously gone out into the world throughout history and sowed in people's hearts a desire for the infinite, for a fulfilled life, and for salvation that sets us free." So the first sort of premise that he's running from real, that he's basing all of this off of, the first premise is that in the very creation of our nature, there's been some sort of ordination to God. And this is really what's going to respond to a lot of our evangelistic and missional work. He says, "The harvest then is plentiful. The kingdom of God grows like a seed in the ground. And the women and men of today, even when seemingly overwhelmed by so many other things, still yearn for a greater truth. They search for a fuller meaning for their lives, desire justice, and carry within themselves a longing for eternal life." And I mean, this is just a huge white pill that he's trying to, begin this statement with, is the fact that actually, what our Lord says is that, the harvest is plentiful. When he's saying the harvest is plentiful, what he means by this is that, when you go into the missional field, actually people are disposed towards receiving the gospel. Like there is this sort of fulfillment of the natural order that happens when supernatural truth comes. Like it fulfills a lot of things for people and is really able to interest them in the truth. So like when we're preaching the gospel to people, when we're spreading the truths of the Catholic faith to people, these are things that actually should come quite naturally. And you should be able to understand what is called the semina verbi. So the seeds of the word. You should be able to understand the seeds of the word in all things and how Christ fulfills, the good which is understood by people. And this we can use in establishing, the Catholic faith among people. So he's saying actually the harvest is plentiful. The harvest is not light. Like we shouldn't go out there assuming that, everybody just hates the message so much that there's no sort of, ability for it to be very compelling with people, because it is very naturally compelling with people if you sort of remove a lot of the blindness, which obviously you can't do. So continuing, on the other hand, however, there are few laborers to go out into the field sown by the Lord, few who are able to distinguish with the eyes of Jesus the good grain that is ripe for harvesting. The Lord wishes to do something great in our lives and in the history of humanity, yet there are few who perceive this, pause to receive the gift, and then proclaim and share it with others. Dear brothers and sisters, the church and the world do not need people who fulfill their religious duties as if faith were merely an external label. And this is like one of the big actually critiques of previous popes, Francis, Benedict XVI, John Paul II, of many of the ways in which the American understanding of the demands of faith happen. Because really for us, we kind of have this cultural heritage where Americans think about the demands of faith as simply being in a sort of limited sphere of our lives. So the demands of faith mean that you pray the rosary once a day and you go to mass on Sundays, or maybe go to mass on Christmas and Easter, go to confession once a year. These are pretty strong demands for most average Catholics in America, but that's really where they put the demands at. They have a distinct sort of sphere of religious duties. But really what's important is that Christ did not come to redeem merely the individual in their religious duties. That's kind of ridiculous. Christ came to redeem man in all of his relations, to redeem man in bringing about his integral good. This integral good means the good that doesn't only sort of prosper him spiritually, but also in his various different connections temporally. So this is going to be, and by the way, spiritual as well, would connected to things like virtue, or we have even things like his material goods. So we can talk about issues of justice right there. So in the various different aspects of man's life, the gospel has come to redeem all of these different aspects, and therefore the church has something to say on all of these different aspects authoritatively. So like we cannot think about our duties being fulfilled by, and then this might be more applicable for those who are watching, your religious duties are not simply fulfilled by, praying once a day, going to mass on Sundays, and, watching a few YouTube videos, or, engaging in debates with Protestants on TikTok, or whatever you guys are doing. Your religious duties are not fulfilled by that. Actually, the entire temporal sphere needs to be redeemed in the image of what the church says. It needs to be redeemed, the entirety of the temporal sphere. So there's a lot of things that need to be done that Catholics need to be doing, and everything like arts, culture, politics, economics, business. There's so many different aspects where you can have a place, and you can, be a participant through the apostolate in the redeeming work of Christ. By the very baptismal charisms, you've been given, the role of a prophet, priest, and king. Like you can do these things. So by engaging in this sort of limitation of the faith, you are simply turning your profession into a sort of hypocritical restriction to a merely singular focus on a few liturgical things. And that's what a lot of people unfortunately think about Catholicism. It's like a liturgical thing, and maybe like a theological thing as well, but it doesn't really have to do much with the various different things you do every day, which is just completely wrong. He says, we need laborers who are eager to work in the mission field, loving disciples who bear witness to the kingdom of God in all places. Perhaps there is no shortage of intermittent Christians who occasionally act upon some religious feeling or participate in sporadic events, but there are few who are ready on a daily basis to labor in God's harvest, cultivating the seed of the gospel in their own hearts in order then to share it with their families. So it's beyond the individual, the cultivation happens on the individual level, but to share with their families, places of work or study, their social contexts, and with those in need, end quote. So we talked about all of these different aspects in which there needs to be the redemptive preaching of the gospel, right? So like you can't have this thing where you somehow pretend like, there's a sectioning off of your Catholicism from the rest of your life. Like if you're not thinking about how your Catholicism, let's say, affects, I don't know, the way in which you, let's say you're a business owner, the way in which you pay your employees. If you're not thinking about how your Catholicism affects that, then you are doing exactly what Pope Leo is warning against. Okay, so now the next day, this is the Laudato Si stuff. This is the creation stuff. I usually don't cover his creation stuff because I'm just not particularly interested in this, but we'll actually have a lot of room for being able to talk about the creation stuff now because we have, less addresses to go over. So this was connected with, you probably heard of it if you've been on the internet, the new Eco Mass, the new Mass for the for creation. This is connected with this. He celebrated it. He talked about a lot of things in relation to the environment. I'm not too interested in the environmental stuff. That's just not one of the sort of charisms that I have, I guess, is in relation to that. That's just not something that I'm super attached to. But, if that's your thing, then I would suggest reading the whole thing. But he did say some interesting things that I think are helpful. And this is where he calls people who hate the earth reprobates. This is where he says all the people who hate the earth, all those faux conservatives that you see that hate the earth, they want to slash regulations so the evil corporations can like dump nuclear waste into our rivers. All those people, he calls them reprobates, and he tells them that they need to convert. So it's very important stuff if you're a true conservative and not one of these libertarian LARPers, okay? This is what he says. This setting that is before a pool of water in some way resembles the ancient churches of the early centuries, where there was a baptismal font that one had to pass through before entering the church. But the symbol of passing through water to be cleansed of all our sins and failings, and then to enter into the great mystery of the church is something that still speaks to us today. At the beginning of Mass, we prayed for conversion, our own conversion. I would like to add that we should pray for the conversion of many people inside and outside the church who do not yet recognize the urgent need to care for our common home. So true. Everyone who hates the environment, everyone who is, who is in favor of the plutocracy completely destroying our environment. Everybody who's in favor of that, everyone who's in favor of China and India dumping trash into the oceans, everyone in favor of that, we need to pray for their conversion because they're reprobates. I mean, I'm saying this a bit glibly, but it is true. I mean, it is true. It's a very evil thing to not care about the preservation of our common home. Only like a comically evil libertarian could even come up with an anti-environmental policy. Okay, so continuing, the many natural disasters we see occurring almost daily in our world, in so many places and countries, are also in part a result of the excesses of human beings in our lifestyles. We need to ask whether we ourselves are undergoing that conversion, how much we need it, end quote. And then after this point, he goes into, a bunch of details about environments and stuff like that. If you want to read it, go ahead and read it. But then he goes and he talks about the Christocentric nature of the apostolate, which I found to be very helpful. So he says, quote, Jesus' rebuke to the wind and the sea demonstrate his power to give life and salvation, a power greater than those forces that cause creatures to tremble. So we can ask ourselves once more, what sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? The hymn from the letter to the Colossians that we have heard seems to answer this very question. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created. Buffeted by the storm that day, his disciples were overcome with fear. They were not able to profess this knowledge about Jesus. Today, however, in accordance with the faith handed down to us, we can go further and say, he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. Those words in every age make us and commit us to be a living body, the body of which Christ is the head. So he goes on, it was kind of funny. It's basically what he's saying here is, we're the body of Christ. We're the body of Christ. We are those legates which have been sent by Christ in order to spread his redemptive work. Or what he's basically saying is he's saying that Christ is king over the entire universe, and we need to bring everything in submission to him. And he's given his example of even bringing creation into submission to himself. So also do we need to somehow care for creation as legates of Jesus Christ. So he continues, our mission to care for creation, to foster peace and reconciliation, is Jesus' own mission, the mission that the Lord entrusts to us. We hear the cry of the earth, and we hear the cry of the poor, because this plan has reached the heart of God. And this is the awesome quote. Our indignation is his indignation. Our work is his work. In this regard, the psalmist's song inspires us. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The glory of God thunders, the Lord upon many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. That voice commits the church to speak prophetically, even when it calls for the courage to oppose the destructive power of the princes of this world. The unbreakable covenant between the Creator and his creatures inspires our minds and galvanizes our efforts to ensure that evil may be turned into good, injustice into justice, and greed into sharing. End quote. So again, he's like he did last week. He did it a lot more forcefully last week, but like he did last week, he is here talking about how there's this sort of like evil cabal. I use that word cabal, not no pun intended, sort of thing. But there's the evil cabal, the princes of this world who are trying to destroy the environment. They're trying to destroy various different peoples. They're trying to destroy entire nations. They're trying to destroy peoples. They're trying to do all of these different things that are evil, and we need to be able to speak out against these people. We need to have the courage. And he says last time, we have the courage to oppose and speak out and to work against these people. And this is, he says, this is going to be the new generation of martyrs, is speaking against these cabal sort of leadership over the entire world. That Catholic action inspires us to oppose. Because we have God on our side, we will win. Okay, so that was for July 9th. So now moving on to July 10th, what I wanted to focus on here, you guys might not like this, but I don't really care because it's important for us to think about this, is I wanted to focus on his message to the Fifth World Day of grandparents and the elderly. So he builds upon, for those who don't know, Pope Francis, he had this cycle of catecheses called the catecheses on the elderly or on old age, basically. And he reflected a lot on, old age, because this is really something which is new in the life of the church. Like, yeah, we've obviously always had old people, but the ubiquitous presence of the elderly. And, a lot of people today, almost everybody who is, on the younger side of things growing up, they remember having their grandparents with them. But that's not really a universal experience throughout the entirety of history. We've extended life so long that we have a flood of old people, right? And especially with dropping birth rates, there becomes a very large portion of the population is elderly. So there needs to be a lot more reflection from the church on this, and Pope Francis really did add in a lot to the magisterium on this. But Pope Leo, he has a message. He talks about a few of the things that we can learn from this increased presence of the elderly, and he also talks about the how do I put it? He also talks about the types of apostolates that can be engaged in. So this is what I mean when I said we have the Pope and he's speaking to every single aspect of life. So we need to take note what he is saying. This is a change in society. The fact that we have all of these elderly people. Okay, now what does the Pope say about this? And what is the Holy See? How is the Holy See ordering and organizing us and demanding from us that we solve some of these problems that come up in relation to these issues? So this can really, for a lot of you out there who are going to be listening to this, there's probably going to be people who this is a specific interest of them. They particularly have that calling, that vocation to care for the elderly. So what Pope Leo is doing here is he's not only instructing you of what the type of things that you can do, but also inspiring you and giving you the foundations for why you would do such a thing. So this is what he says on the first point, kind of some of the theological aspects of the elderly. It says, quote, "In the Bible, God repeatedly demonstrates his providential care by turning to people in their later years. This was the case not only with Abraham, Sarah, Zechariah, and Elizabeth, but also with Moses, who was called to set his people free when he was already 80 years old. God thus teaches us that, in his eyes, old age is the time of blessing and grace, and that the elderly are, for him, the first witnesses of hope." Augustine asks, what do we mean by old age? He tells us that God himself answers the question, "Let your strength fail so that my strength may abide with you, and you can say with the apostle, when I am weak, then I am strong." The increasing number of elderly people is a sign of the times that we need to that we are called to discern in order to interpret properly this moment of history. The life of the church, and this is a really cool part. So yeah, we've already talked about this in terms of the weakness, the grace in weakness that we see among old people. I don't I don't mean to so flippantly call them old people, among the elderly. Okay, if I use the term old people, I don't mean it badly. That's just kind of how I describe the elderly. Okay, but he continues. The life of the church and the world can only be understood in light of the passage of generations. Embracing the elderly helps us to understand that life is more than just the present moment and should not be wasted in superficial encounters and fleeting relationships. This is very important here. What he's saying is when we look at the elderly, when we look at the older people, what we see is we actually see a sort of forward-looking nature. This is something that a lot of the literature, a lot of the spiritual literature surrounding meditation on death is very important. When we meditate on death, this is something that is frequently recommended in the tradition. We see that we're able to see everything in its true light, right? Should I go and do this? Should I go that? When I'm doing that sort of examination of the different choices that I have and what I should choose, a lot of those choices can be very easily resolved if you sort of place yourself on your deathbed or say, okay, well, will this matter, to a saint in heaven, who is already dead, or to a soul in purgatory? Like what is the significance of this decision in light of death? But we can also look about these decisions in light of, being an elderly person, like looking back on your life, like how will these sort of moments and these decisions, how will these be reflected? And it keeps us distant from a lot of the sort of superficial and unimportant aspects of our day-to-day life, or even like our week-to-week or month-to-month or even year-to-year life. Really in the grand scheme of life, a 2 to 3 year span is not that much, if you live an entire and full life. So we can see these things in terms of, the bigger picture when you talk to people who are old and you ask them about, the experiences of their life and how they look back on them. So he says, instead, life is constantly pointing us toward the future. In the book of Genesis, we find the moving episode of the blessing given by the aged Jacob to his grandchildren, the sons of Joseph. His words are an appeal to look to the future with hope, as the time when God's promises will be fulfilled. If it is true that the weakness of the elderly needs the strength of the young, it is equally true that the inexperience of the young need the witness of the elderly in order to build the future with wisdom. How often our grandparents have been for us examples of faith and devotion, civic virtue and social commitment, memory and perseverance amid trials. The precious legacy that they have handed down to us with hope and love will always be a source of gratitude and a summons to perseverance. End quote. So that's sort of his idea about the big significance of our union with older generations, especially as young people, because most of the people watching this, most of you guys are in your teens or 20s. So this is especially important. Call your grandparents, okay? Call your grandparents. They miss you. Okay, so now continuing, he actually goes into, this is sort of the theology behind it. Now he goes into, okay, what are the practicalities? What are the practical issues in which we can establish an apostolate to the elderly as younger people? This is what he says. Looking at the elderly in the spirit of this Jubilee, we are called to help them experience liberation, especially from loneliness and abandonment. This year is a fitting time to do so. God's fidelity to his promises teaches us that there's a blessedness in old age, an authentic evangelical joy, inspiring us to break through the barriers of indifference in which the elderly often find themselves enclosed. Our societies everywhere in the world are growing all too accustomed to letting this significant, enriching part of their life be marginalized and forgotten. And that is especially true for us. So, I mean, for us, as most of us are listening, are probably also white Westerners. As white Westerners, we're sticking our grandparents or parents, grandparents into the nursing home. We're kicking them away. There's that funny interview with Tucker Carlson, and the guy in charge of I think it was like the foreign minister of Qatar. I listened to that interview, and he said this thing about how in order to achieve some sort of international recognition of social development, they had to build a bunch of nursing homes. But that's not even something that is useful in their society because their parents, live with them as they get older. So like this sort of idea of the marginalization of the elderly is especially a problem for us because there is no more an inclusion, a day-to-day inclusion of the elderly in family life like there was in previous generations and like there are in the outside of a lot of the contemporary West. So he continues, given the situation, a change of pace is needed. That would be really readily seen as an assumption of responsibility on the part of the whole church. Every parish, association, ecclesial group is called to become a protagonist. You're a protagonist in this. You don't have to wait for other people to tell you to do this. In a revolution of gratitude and care, to be brought about by regular visits to the elderly, the creation of networks of support and prayer for them and with them, and the forging of relationships that can restore hope and dignity to those who feel forgotten. And this is something that he's going to say later when he's talking about the Good Samaritan and the relationship of the Good Samaritan to Catholic action and to Catholic social teaching, is when it comes to what he's saying here, we often have like an indifference. Like this is a perpetual problem that we have with the elderly, their loneliness, et cetera, et cetera. They're not being included in domestic society or civil society, not having these social relationships. This is a huge problem with the elderly, right? And this is something that is caused by cultural issues, of course. This is something that the church, as the sort of universal redeemer of mankind, the church has an obligation to always be aware of those problems that arise and to think uniquely of those remedies where we're going to be able to solve the problem. If you don't, we invented hospitals, for example. If you don't have hospitals, you need this expensive care from local doctors. You start free hospitals. Like there was a problem that arose and we fixed it. So you have these issues of the elderly who are marginalized, ignored, et cetera, et cetera. We find out problems. Like we're the Catholic Church. We fix everything. So we can fix this problem as well. Like we don't need to sit around and wait for some other guy to fix this problem. Like if this is your inclination, figure out how to fix the problem, okay? And organize other people to help fix the problem. Get with other people who are able to spread about the news about the solutions to this problem, gather donations for the fixing of the problem, and do these sorts of things full time. You're part of the Catholic Church. Like you can fix this. Like this is the lay apostolate gives you not only the right but the obligation to in the social sphere to solve these sorts of problems. Maybe for you it's not the elderly that's your thing, but there needs to be something that is your thing. And who knows what it's going to be, but it is something. It's not nothing. So continue, he said, Christian hope always urges us to be more daring, to think big. This is so true. Christian hope always urges us to be more daring, to think big, to be dissatisfied with things the way they are. This is so true. A lot of you guys, I see the black pilling, but you cannot black pill. Okay. I see a lot of you guys, you sit back and you just whine and cry about how bad things. I see it all the time. You're like, oh, oy vey, it's so bad. All of these different aspects of my life are so bad. My local parish sucks. The catechesis in the church sucks. Politics sucks. Economics sucks. You'll complain about all of these different problems in society, but you're not thinking big. You don't have Christian hope. Because hope, trust in the help of God. That's what hope is. Hope is trusting in future promises because God is God and he can help you do it. And he can overcome all of the obstacles. Like he was just talking about when it came to the environment. The voice of the Lord is powerful. It's able to overcome all of these different things. So you're sitting back, you're whining, you're crying about how all of these things suck, but you don't have Christian hope. You're not thinking big. You're not just dissatisfied with how things are going. You're not thinking big. You need to think big. You need to think of solutions. And not only thinking of solutions and yapping about them, some people yap about solutions like me, that's kind of my job though. But not just sitting around yapping about solutions, but actually putting these into practice. You're a Catholic. Nobody's stopping you from doing stuff. Like you can just do things. You can solve problems. You can think about how these are solved and then put them into practice. You don't have to just do this in the sort of local parish sphere and maybe think about how I'm going to do catechesis in my local parish. That might be something that's for you. Or maybe think about, I'm going to altar serve, or I'm going to do online apologetics. I'm going to do all of these different things. Like that's not for everybody. Like if you have a sort of religious calling to solve a problem, you don't have to like go on the internet and start an apologetics YouTube channel or like a Twitter dedicated to defending Catholicism. Like there are so many other problems to fix, right? Of course, obviously we have the places for the apologists and the type of work they do, but the apostolate is so broad. There's so many different things you could do. There's so many different things that you could do. Okay. And hope is the foundation of this because it trusts in the help of God who can overcome any single evil that stands in our way. And then he's going to go into this with the AI stuff, but I'm actually going to loop back to the AI stuff because I want to go into his sermon for the Mass of the Good Samaritan because he goes into a lot of these issues of indifference as basically how a lot of us, we go and we see these problems, but we just kind of walk past them and pretend like we don't see them rather than, swooping down and healing the person. And these are the type of problems that Catholic Action are going to fix. So he says that parable constantly challenges us to think about our own lives. It troubles our dormant and distracted consciences. So dormant and distracted consciences. Dormant consciences is you have such a weak conscience that you see problems and it doesn't just strike you that these problems need to be fixed. And you're sort of wondering about how these problems can be fixed, praying maybe for their fixing, acting towards their fixing, things like that. In distracted consciences is a completely different problem. Because not only when you see these things is it just not just eating away at you, but also you are just distracted by so many very worthless things that you are focusing on all the stuff that doesn't matter. So you have a distracted conscience. You're not focusing on all of these issues that need solutions in light of the gospel. You're focusing on a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. Okay. You're just focusing on a bunch of random stuff. He says, and warns us about the risk of complacent faith that is satisfied with the outward observance of the law, but incapable of feeling and acting with the same merciful compassion as God. And that's what a lot of Catholic action is going to flow from, is being able to have merciful compassion, to want to swoop down and heal a problem because you know that this is destructive towards the good of individuals, the common good, etc. This actually hurts people, right? Dear brothers and sisters, how we look at others is what counts because it shows what is in our hearts. We can look and walk by, or we can look and be moved with compassion. There's a kind of seeing that is superficial, distracted, and hasty, a way of seeing while pretending not to see. We can see without being touched or challenged by the sight. This too, then too, there is seeing with the eyes of the heart, looking more closely, empathizing with the other, sharing his or her experience, letting ourselves be touched and challenged. This way of seeing calls into question the way we live our lives and the responsibility we feel towards others. We can understand then why this parable is so challenging for each of us. If Christ shows us the face of the compassionate God, then to believe in him and to be his disciples means allowing ourselves to be changed and to take on the same feeling. It means learning to have a heart that is moved, eyes that see and do not look away. This is like we could actually have like a very detailed explanation of each one of these clauses. We have the heart that is moved. So you need to have the actual conscience, which is going to be moved by the apprehension of the thing. Eyes that see and do not look away. So we actually need to apprehend the thing itself. So we need to have the eyes that are able to apprehend problems. So don't be sort of naive or stupid or clueless. Like you have an obligation to pay attention where things are going bad. So don't do this sort of like medieval peasant LARP. You know, I hate that too. That's such a LARP. Like, oh, I'm a medieval peasant. I don't care about what the Pope says. I just kind of like go to mass and stuff. I don't care about, all the problems in society. Like, okay, dude. That's just awful. Like you've just ignored what the popes have been saying for a very long time about Catholic action. But you have eyes that see, a heart that is moved, so you apprehend the thing, then you're moved by the thing, and then hands that help others and soothe their wounds, and then shoulders that bear the burden of those in need. So the hands and the shoulders that are going to help people is, okay, I have eyes that see, I have a heart that is moved, but now I have hands that are able to actually go and solve the problem. Solving the problem. A lot of people ask me, okay, you use that word Catholic action so much. What does Catholic action mean? Catholic action means this. You see problems, your heart is moved by this in the evangelical spirit, and you solve it in accordance with the teaching of the church. That is what Catholic action is. Catholic action could be, like teaching your kid. Catholic action could be treating your wife properly. Catholic action could be, going and, becoming a politician. There's many different aspects to Catholic action. It doesn't look the same for everyone because everyone has different gifts. Catholic action could be painting a quite lovely painting that is going to lead people into contemplating the truth. There's a lot of different ways, but those three aspects need to be held universally, right? And for all the people who just try to go out there and LARP and say, "Oh, I see all these problems, but I'm too pious to be concerned with all of these dirty worldly problems that are had by people." That's so stupid. That is so stupid. It's completely against the entire logic of the incarnation and the entire mission of the church to disciple all nations. Like if you're living out the Catholic faith through a screen purely, and you're living out the Catholic faith, maybe you go to mass and just kind of about it, then you are not living the Catholic faith. You're doing something completely different. You're doing something completely against the logic of the incarnation and the mission of Christ to all nations, the demands of Pope after Pope after Pope after Pope, going far before Vatican II, by the way. It's just a complete, it's a complete hatred of the temporal order that's just completely unacceptable for those who are Catholic. And this is what he says. Today, the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho is the road traveled by all those who descend into sin, suffering, and poverty. So he mentions three things that we have to help people out of: sin, suffering, poverty. Sin, suffering, poverty. It is the road traveled by all those weighed down by troubles or hurt by life. The road traveled by all who fall down, lose their bearings, and hit rock bottom. The road traveled by all those people who are stripped, robbed, and pillaged, victims of tyrannical political systems, of an economy that forces them into poverty, and of wars that kill their dreams and their very lives. What do? Do we look and walk by, or do we open our hearts to others like the Samaritan? Are we content at times merely to do our duty, or to regard as our neighbor only those who are part of our group, who think like us, who share our same nationality or religion? Jesus overturns this way of thinking by presenting us with a Samaritan, a foreigner or heretic, who acts as a neighbor to that wounded man, and he asks us to do the same. Looking without walking by, halting the frantic pace of our lives, allowing the lives of others, whoever they may be, with their needs and troubles to touch our heart. That is what makes us neighbors to one another, which generates true fraternity and breaks down walls and barriers. In the end, love prevails and proves more powerful than evil and death. End quote. So that's actually we're kind of getting about to the hour point. There was two other things that I wanted to cover. What he said about AI, but I've covered AI so much. And he says something about a little bit about Mariology in his homily to the members of the military, which, you know, it's not really too unique or anything like that. But I did want to cover a brief paragraph that he gave on the duties of the civil, this sort of authorities. He says, quote, "I thus thank the authorities present, both civil and military, for all you do in fulfilling your duties. Faced with injustices that wound the social order, do not give in to the temptation to believe evil might prevail. Especially in this time of war and violence, remain faithful to your oath. As servants of the state, respond to crime with the strength of law and honesty." End quote. I just really like that quote. That's why I wanted to read it before I go. But yeah, it's been an hour. I'll answer some of those super chats that you guys gave, and yeah, I'll get going. I'll be streaming tomorrow night. Friday I will not be streaming because it's my wife's birthday. Happy birthday, Lexi! Happy birthdays in the chat. But will not be streaming on Friday. Tomorrow I will be streaming with Christian Mario and Joshua Charles. We'll be having a fun little conversation about a lot of different aspects. But yeah, I think that's the only announcement, except check out in the description if you're somebody who can edit shorts and things like that. I might be able to hire you. If you do good work, I will pay you, and I will pay you well if you do good work, okay? Wagner, can you explain how this will impact the tax policy in Tanzania? No. Appreciation donation, loving the Pope Leo XIV streams. Thank you. If anybody has feedback of how they think I can make them better or anything like that, then you should comment on the video, because I do appreciate some good feedback, right? Keep up the good work. Thank you. I appreciate it. Ullman, I have no idea about non-dualistic religion. I can't even pronounce any of those words that you gave. Never litter, never pollute, always recycle. So true. So true. 40 likes with 240 watching is pretty sad and goy. Yeah, everyone liked the YouTube video. Okay. Flex Cathedra. Leo will make Augustinian theology popular again. It's awesome to think Augustine will be known to this generation. I love Thomas, but Augustine's great. Dude, Flex Cathedra. For those who don't know, we go way back. I've known this man since before I became Catholic. He is on Instagram. Somehow, I don't even remember how, I got included in one of his group chats with a lot of Catholics while I was an Anglican LARPer. So I've known him for a while. I always appreciate Flex Cathedra. But yes, this is one of the things that I am most happy to see. Is I'm very, very excited to see an Augustinian Pope. I named my son after St. Augustine, okay? I'll be very excited to see an Augustinian Pope. So that's all that I have for you guys. I hope that you guys appreciated this. Remember to like, remember to subscribe. If you really enjoy my work, you can go to Patreon at patreon.com/MiltonThomist. If you want to give some sort of monthly support. The monthly support really does actually help the most because it's very consistent, unlike a lot of the other types of support that often I get from, the apostolate. Okay, so I hope that all of you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, God bless.